There is a tremendous problem in our modern day society with the outright rejection of reality. Whether it be the aliveness and personhood of an unborn human fetus, the fact that we are born into biologically set genders and sexes, the successful history of communism, or rather lack thereof, it really doesn't seem to matter a whole lot because we are in an age where reality is supposed to play second fiddle to whatever it is that we feel and believe. And that has very dangerous consequences, as we have seen time and time again with transgender shooters. We're going to talk about the Minneapolis church shooting today and many other things. I hope you are edified by this content. Welcome to the Watchdog. Shalom, friends, and welcome to this episode of The Watchdog. I am your host, CJ Cox, here to tell you, of course, that we are living in biblical times. I want to go ahead and say shaloms all around to anybody who is currently in the live chat. If you are in the live chat, please remember to like and share this video. Please remember to subscribe to this channel if you have not done so. Hit the bell to get notified every time that we go live. And remember, you can leave any questions, comments, criticisms, concerns, critiques, anything of that nature in the comment section down below. If you'd like to follow us on various social media platforms, you can do so. I am on Gab, Parler, Facebook Minds, Twitter, Truth Social, MeWe, MetaCafe, and etc. Whatever social media platforms you frequent, you can find me at the tag The Synagogue. And if you are on those social media platforms, please do consider sharing this video to those social media platforms. It helps with reach immensely. If you'd like to contribute to the work that we do here, of course, there are various ways you can do so. You can either give a one-time donation to the PayPal. You can subscribe to our Patreon for as much or as little as you like to contribute monthly. And you can also buy my book, 15 Questions for Calvinists Answered. Link will be provided in the description below, although now that I think about it, I think I might have actually forgotten to set up a description today. Sorry, guys, there's a cat in here, and he is being a nuisance. Because he always is being a nuisance. Isn't that right, dude? You can't help it. In terms of channel housekeeping, obviously don't have a whole lot to get to. We are on the drive to 100 subs, which is the first of a couple of milestones we'll be wanting to hit here. So if you guys want to help us hit that, please do consider sharing this video to your friends and family, co-congregants, co-workers, anybody who you think might enjoy the content. We do like to do a This Day in History fun fact. And I'll be honest, I was finding it pretty difficult to think of a This Day in History fun fact that I knew of off the top of my head. So then I decided to look up August 29th, and it was kind of difficult to find a interesting This Day in History. Hey, guy, fun fact. So that was also kind of a thing there. I decided to go with something I don't know a whole lot about, but it did fascinate me. According to the Wikipedia article for August 29th, on August 29th, 1911, a Native American by the name of Ishi was the last Native American to make contact with European Americans, which is to say it was this Ishi was the last Native American to have not had any contact with white men whatsoever, before eventually, of course, coming into contact with Americans at that point, right? Because it's now we're talking about 1911. I mean, this is thoroughly into the United States of America's existence, right? Made contact with them on August 29th, 1911. Ishi was male, in case you're curious about that name, and he was a member of the Yahi tribe. He was from what we would today call modern day California, down near Oroville. If you're not familiar with California, Oroville is, dude, come on, really? Chill out. Oroville is up in the north, kind of center of the north, a little bit, I guess, near Sacramento would be a fair way to put it. I don't know exactly how far it is from Sacramento, to be honest with you. But it's right around in that same general area, the center of the northern part of the state. And yeah, Ishi apparently emerged out of the California wilderness and made contact with white men, Americans, in Oroville, or near, rather, Oroville, California, in 1911, August 29th. So I found that to be incredibly interesting. It was the only fact here that I could find that was worth sharing with you guys. So that's the This Day in History fact that we decided to go with. A couple other things I want to get to, or one other thing really that I want to get to before we decide to move on to the content, which is I did neglect to mention the Rumble page. Please do consider subscribing to the Rumble page if you have a Rumble account. If you don't have a Rumble account, please do consider getting a Rumble account. There are a couple different reasons why we recommend that you get a Rumble account. Number one, it is a competitor, an active competitor of YouTube, right? And it's an active competitor of YouTube that actually does not censor free speech. Now, this is that point in and of itself can be divided into 2 points, which is number one, using an active competitor of YouTube because they don't censor free speech incentivizes YouTube to not censor certain kinds of speech, particularly as it pertains to this channel, conservative political content, but also our other channel talks about Christian theological content. They censor a lot of history on this channel, a lot of philosophy on this channel, a lot of news on this channel, or excuse me, on this website, not on this channel, right? We're not censoring on this channel, but on this website. And the more people use YouTube's competitors, the more incentive YouTube has to not decide to censor these things any longer, right? But on top of that, you reward Rumble for not censoring people. So that's that's a big win for free speech alone, in that the people who are deciding to go against the censorship overlords actually get something, you could call it tangible, for their contributions to human liberty and to society. So those are the two reasons that make up the first reason, right? Two little sub-reasons within the first reason. The second reason you should get a Rumble account is because sometimes videos do get taken down off of this channel. In fact, this particular video is one video that very likely would end up getting taken off this channel. Not only are we going to be talking about a mass shooting that just took place, but on top of that, we're going to be talking about the issue of transgenderism. And especially as it pertains to the conservative point of view on transgenderism, YouTube no likey, right? So we have had videos taken down before talking about things like bit. And if you don't know what that means, sorry, I can't actually say the term, but see my thing, right? What is that doing? Guy holding something, pushing that something into somebody's vein, perhaps. Hopefully you catch my drift. We've got a few videos taken down talking about those sorts of things. It's entirely possible that this video gets taken down for similar reasons. And if it does get taken down, guess where you can find it? Well, you can find it on the Rumble channel, right? On top of that, a third reason why you should subscribe on the Rumble channel is because what if this entire channel gets taken down? It's a backup for us, right? If you actually like the Watchdog and our conservative political content, well, wouldn't it be nice to always have a place to go just in case YouTube decides to get a hair up their tuchus and return to the way that they had been doing things really up until like a year ago, right? We have a weird level of freedom right now comparatively to what YouTube was doing just like I said, like a year ago. And there's no guarantee that that's going to continue. In fact, I can guarantee that it won't continue. So there is that. So yeah, please consider subscribing to the Rumble. And yeah, that's pretty much all we have for channel housekeeping. Went through all that stuff. So we have a lot of fascinating things to discuss today. We are going to be discussing a lot regarding the recent shooting in Minneapolis at Annunciation Church. Of course, Annunciation is a Catholic church, but obviously, despite our strong disagreements with Roman Catholicism, we in no way, shape, or form endorse or even are apathetic towards the shooting of a bunch of children in a Catholic school, or for that matter, the shooting of anybody, right? We don't want Catholics dying. That's not part of the point here. I only point that out just because there has been rhetoric going around that anti-Catholic propaganda, as they would put it, is partially to blame for this shooting. That's, of course, complete and total nonsense. But I figured I'd just get it out of the way right now. No, obviously we don't. The fact that we have strong disagreements with you does not mean we want you or your children to be dying. This was an absolute tragedy, right? And we are going to be talking about particularly the shooter. Before we get to that, though, I wanted to share with you a little controversial opinion of mine, right? Let me go ahead and get another drink of my water here. And my friends, this is not the kind of thing that should be a controversial opinion, but unfortunately it is in the year of our Lord 2025. We always talk about how we should not have transitioning. We should not allow transitioning for minors in this country, or frankly in any other country, right? And we talk about how we don't want drag queen story hour, and we talk about how, all these different things that pertain to the transgender movement. When it comes to children, that should be a line. No, sorry, we're not allowed to do that. You can do whatever you want with your own body in your own home, but that should be a line. And my controversial opinion is, I actually think that's the wrong fight to fight. I don't think we should ban transitioning for minors. I think we should ban transitioning. Like, full stop, just the whole thing, right? The practice as a whole needs to be made illegal, whether it be for minors, which of course is especially pertinent, or if it be for fully grown adults. You should not have a right. First off, there's no such thing as transitioning. Let's just get that out of the way. Okay, you cannot possibly transition from a male to a female or from a female to a male. It's not possible. Can't happen. Can't be done. You're either a male or a female. You are what you were born. There's a very rare minority of people who could be labeled intersex. But they are such a small and minute number in the general population that we're not going to address that matter here at this current stage in the conversation, right? Nor could I, frankly, because I'm not a medical doctor, and I know very little about, what it means to be intersex or anything like that. That being said, transgenderism is an affront against nature. It is an affront against God. It is a demonstration of, at best, severe delusion and mental illness, and at worst, depravity and evil, which is another thing I feel the need to clarify here. We always talk about, well, these people are just severely mentally distressed. I have no doubt that that's true for some. But we do this thing very often as humans where we want to explain people's bizarre behavior by means of some sort of defection, right? Like, for example, we'll say, when we look at Jeffrey Dahmer, it's like something must have been wrong with him. He must have been insane somehow. And that's why he did the horrible things that he did. And the reality is, no, not really. actually. He's a fairly normal, lucid, sane guy who also happens to be diabolically evil, right? And I think a very similar thing could be said as it pertains to the transgender issue. I think a lot of transgender people, it's not that they're insane. It's not that they're delusional. Obviously, they have delusions, right? But we are just sitting here ignoring the very real possibility that a large number of these people are simply evil. And it's that simple. They simply want to rebel against God and against the created order. And I think that's a much more likely explanation for the rise in transgenderism than some sort of, nationwide identity crisis or nationwide battle with mental illness. I think it's an example of what Romans 1 talks about when it says God turned them over to a reprobate mind. Professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. They decided to worship the creation rather than the creator, and so God turns them over to a debased and decrepit mind. And that is exactly what you have taking place in the United States of America and, frankly, all across the Western world, right? But back here to the point I'm making, I don't understand why we think it should be legal to transition in the first place. People say, well, people should have a right to do whatever they wish. Well, no, that's not true because heroin's illegal, right? None of us thinks that you should have a right to inject yourself with heroin. And yet that's a liberty technically that we're taking away from some people, right? So clearly the vast majority of us don't mean that when we say liberty. Okay, well, you should have the right to have autonomy over your own body. Well, again, the heroin example, right? You should have the right to determine your own path. Nobody should interfere with your will as it pertains to your own path. And again, I could just list another drug example, but I could list plenty of other examples as well, like polygamy, you know what I mean? And various things that we have made illegal that don't actually impact, at least not in a direct way, people outside of the A and B parties involved, right? So clearly none of those arguments actually work. And we can make a fairly convincing case that transgenderism is both a detriment to the person and a detriment to society. We know, for example, that there is a massive uptake in violence, mass shootings in particular, being perpetrated by transgender individuals, right? And frankly, I should use a different terminology because, as we said, transition is not a thing that could happen. So we should say gender confused, maybe, at best, right? Cross-dressers, if you like. They're an active threat to society in that they try to pervert our children. They're an active threat to society in that they create this illusion that reality can be broken. They're an active threat to society in the sense that they are literally killing members of society. And I think the transgender movement needs to be controlled legally. I think it needs to be controlled legally. I think it should be at the state level, for the record. I'm not saying the federal government should do anything about this, but I think we should start to move towards an outright ban of transitioning surgeries, period. Get rid of the whole thing, right? So I wanted to share that opinion with you. I don't think I shared it particularly well because I'm tired, but hopefully you guys agree, or at least, I gave you some food for thought. All right, so the Annunciation shooting was perpetrated by Robin Westman, born Robert Westman, a 23-year-old male who self-identified as a female. Of course, he was not. Now, he says in his diary that he was actually annoyed and spiteful about having been brainwashed into being transgender. He also says in his diary, he says things like, I know I'm not a woman, but I definitely don't feel like a man, kind of thing. So he clearly still felt himself to be somewhere on the spectrum of gender fluidity, right? Nevertheless, on August the 27th, 2025, Westman decided to walk into Annunciation Church, or more precisely Church of the Annunciation, in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and start shooting at a bunch of children in an all-school mass, right? So they were all taking mass, but it was particularly school children who were here taking mass at this time. It was approximately 8:30 a.m., give or take, when he decided to start shooting. And the bastard managed to successfully, and sorry for the language, but he's a terrible person, managed to successfully kill 2 of the children, ages 8 and 10, while also injuring 15 other children and 3 adults. The 3 adults, all 3 of them being in their 80s. So exclusively preying on those weaker than himself. He himself did end up dying in the shootout. And a manifesto was found and apparently has even been published. It's really a YouTube video. And I'll just read for you what the Wikipedia article says about the manifesto real briefly before we get into some of the news. Westman posted 2 YouTube videos, one 10 minutes and the other 20 minutes, showing writings which referred to suicide, depression, and extremely violent thoughts and ideas, a message addressed to my family and friends, and a drawing of the layout of a church. A video showed a quantity of guns, bullets, and magazines. Messages were written on the guns, including anti-Semitic, anti-Catholic, and racist phrases. The words "Kill Donald Trump" and 6 million wasn't enough, referring to the Holocaust death toll, and the names of mass shooters Adam Lanza, Anders Breivik, and Breton Tarrant, the last of whom wrote similar statements on his firearms. The channel, of course, was taken down shortly after the uploads. Now, for those who do not know, Adam Lanza was the one who shot up Sandy Hook back in 2012. Anders Breivik is responsible for the largest terrorist attack in Norway's history back in 2011. And Breton Tarrant was a mass shooter from New Zealand who in March of 2019 shot up a mosque, actually, in an act of very clear anti-Islamic terrorism. Now, we want to get into the details of who this person was, right? And so the first article we're going to actually look at here is just about the shooter himself, right? What do we know about Robin Westman, originally born Robert Westman, which we'll call him Robin, I guess. There's nothing wrong with that, but obviously he is a he and not a she, or not a they for that matter. He's not multiple people, right? But I digress. So let's go ahead and pull up this first article here. What we know about the shooter who killed 2 and wounded 18 in Minneapolis. This is originally from the Associated Press. At least that's the website I'm getting it from, AP News. And the writer of this article is Claudia Lauer, with help from Bruce Schreiner and Hannah Fingerhut. This is published today at 3:34, yesterday at 3:34 Pacific time. And let's jump right into it. The shooter who killed 2 children and injured 18 worshipers attending Mass at a Minneapolis Catholic school was quiet and seemed to resent school as an 8th grader there 7 years ago, a former classmate has said. Officials identified the shooter as Robin Westman and said Thursday that Westman was a former student at Annunciation Catholic School. The ex-classmate recalled Westman once hid in the bathroom to avoid going to the all-school Mass. YouTube videos allegedly posted by the shooter suggest Westman experienced depression and expressed admiration for at least a dozen other acts of mass violence, but didn't spell out any specific ideology. And actually, brief note, the ideological commitments of Westman do seem to be a little bit all over the map. He was transgender, and he did have a picture, Protect Equality. It was a picture of a gun posted over the transgender flag that has that little triangle in it for like Black Lives Matter and all that kind of stuff, right? So he clearly has some level of left-wing ideation. At the same time, he did flirt with neo-Nazi ideas. Now, the 6 million is not enough quotation is not something that is exclusive to people on the far right wing. In fact, one could argue, and I would, that Nazism is actually not really truly right wing or left wing. It's kind of a syncretic ideology that takes elements from both. But even that aside, obviously groups like Hamas and the Nation of Islam and Black Panthers, you know what I mean? Black Lives Matter, interesting, a lot of Black Power movements have had extremely anti-Semitic rhetoric in the past, and of course have very left-wing ideologies by and large. In fact, as an example of that, the Black Panther Party was a Marxist party openly, and was, at least amongst some iterations, a socially progressive party, right? Black Lives Matter is obviously very socially progressive, pro-gay, pro-sexual revolution, pro-abortion, right? And of course, very much run by Marxists. So the idea that actually would have him labeled as a right-winger is a little bit misleading in and of itself. But those are the kinds of things that we have to build off of, right? We know he was a transgender person. We know that he was, that he had, killed Donald Trump on his rifle. We know that he hated Jews. 6 million is not enough on his rifle. We know that he was very anti-Catholic and very anti-Christian generally. We know that he had a flag, like I said, of the gay pride flag with the transgender triangle and the little one for Black Lives Matter and another one for immigrants and all that other kind of stuff. So this is clearly, I think, even though the ideology is kind of all over the map in the sense that there's not one firm ideology here, but nevertheless, there is things that seem to lean one way and a whole group of things that seem to lean another. I think we could just say that since there is a large amount of racist and anti-Semitic people on the left, and not even necessarily far left, it's actually fairly common to be accepted just in the left generally. See, Ilhan Omar is a perfect example of that, or Cenk Uygur, right? Considering that, I would consider this to be an act of left-wing terrorism, but also considering just how often this happens, this anti-Christian and anti-Catholic style attack happens, and it's coming from a transgender person, I would actually say that this is a more specifically not a left-wing terrorist attack, but a transgender terrorist attack. I would actually not. This isn't identity politics. I think transgender, because first off, transgender is not your true identity, right? I think transgenderism is an ideology. LGBTQ movement is an ideology, and that ideology is perverting people's minds to such an extent that they feel the need to go and slaughter children, right? So that's what I would label this as, an LGBT terrorist attack. But, of course, the media would never do so. Anyways, armed with a rifle, shotgun, and pistol, Westman approached the side of the church at Annunciation Catholic School and fired more than 100 rounds through the windows just before 8:30 a.m. Wednesday. Westman was found dead in the parking lot from what authorities believe was a self-inflicted gunshot. And, of course, it's in the hands of God now. The Lord will do with this man what he sees fit. I got to be honest, I'd hate to be him on Judgment Day. That being said, I will admit I'm rather saddened that he's dead, because I think it would be awesome if the state had executed him. Now, of course, in order for that to happen, we would need states that were actually willing to execute violent criminals. Unfortunately, the vast majority of states in this country are not willing to execute violent criminals. In fact, a lot of them are more interested in blaming victims than they are in actually executing violent criminals. But I am so pro-death penalty, it's completely freaking ridiculous. And I am a little disappointed that this man does not have to face a trial, be judged by a jury of his peers, and then be executed in a way that, I'm not going to lie, I do wish would hurt a little. And actually, to be honest, that's not even like a sadistic kind of thing. It is one of those things where I am against torture. Very much against torture. I do hate this idea, though, that like, well, you can't do that because it's inhumane, right? People start talking about like, you can't hang people because that's inhumane. It's like, first off, not really. It's not like we're lighting you on fire or stoning you to death. If it hurts a little, well, that's God's choice. But it is designed actually to, to break your neck such that you don't actually have any sort of a problem with suffering or anything like that. But it's also like, where do we get this idea that punishment is supposed to be humane? You know what I mean? Or is supposed to be comfortable? I guess is what I mean. Because humane, like I said, I'm against torture. It should be humane. But where do we get this idea that punishment is supposed to be comfortable? I have no idea. I don't think punishment is supposed to be comfortable. Anyways, besides the point, let's continue on with the article. Hang on, I got to do something here real quick. All right, sorry about that. Continuing on with the article. Westman legally purchased the weapon, had no arrest history, and acted alone, the chief said, which, by the by, that's going to come up because one of the articles we're going to read here is further calls for gun control. It's too easy to get a gun. But actually, all of the gun control plans, with the exception of outright banning guns, would not have prevented this person from buying a firearm because he was an adult and he had no arrest history. And he had no history of diagnosed mental illness, although I would argue that being a transgender is probably enough. Digression aside, in response to a request for any records of police contact with the shooter in the last decade, the Eagan Police Department, southwest of Minneapolis, sent 2 heavily redacted documents. The first from 2018 is listed as a mental health call for a welfare check for a child with parents Mary Grace Westman and James Westman, but the case narrative was redacted. A second narrative from 2016 involving a criminal complaint was entirely redacted. And by redacted, by the way, the reason you can say no arrest history despite that kind of a complaint, first off, he wasn't arrested, but second off, with it being redacted, it was almost certainly something where like your record was expunged. And even the mental health thing, somebody might say, well, didn't you just say he had no history of a mental health diagnosis? I did. Hence the word diagnosis, right? A mental health check, not the same thing as a diagnosis of some kind. You also got to keep in mind this was 9 years ago at this point. Or excuse me, no, the mental health one was 7 years ago at this point. And Westman was a 16-year-old boy at that point. Right, so that's not something that you're typically going to have held against you as time goes on. But I digress again. Officials have recovered hundreds of pieces of evidence from the church and 3 associated residences, including additional writings and electronic devices, O'Hara said. Authorities were scouring the videos now removed from public view and other online content. The FBI is investigating Wednesday's shooting as an act of domestic terrorism and a hate crime targeting Catholics, officials said, which, to be fair, it absolutely was. I don't think that hate crime legislation is necessary because I think the concept of a hate crime is stupid. But this was clearly an anti-Catholic terrorist attack. There's no doubt about that. And perhaps, considering the anti-Christian rhetoric that Westman would use, you could call it an anti-Christian terrorist attack, but he was specifically gearing most of it towards the Catholic Church, and so I think anti-Catholic is perfectly sufficient. Lily Kletter, 22, couldn't figure out why Robin Westman's face looked so familiar until she looked back at a photo from the Annunciation class of 2017. Quote, I didn't know him super well. They say them, by the way, but I'm not going to use that terminology. But he was in my grade. They were in my grade. Stupid. But he was in my grade, Kletter said of Robin Westman, known to classmates as Bob. Their class was small, about 50 kids, most of whom had known each other since they were little, Kletter said. Robin Westman came in at some point in middle school, she also noted. Kletter remembered Westman from a few classes, saying Westman would sit in the back and kind of skulk around. Westman had a couple of friends, but Kletter remembers often seeing Westman sitting alone during their short 15-minute lunch break, saying, quote, I remember he had a crazy distaste for school, especially Annunciation, which I always thought was pretty interesting because his mom was on the parish board, end quote, she said. I remember this one time he was hiding in the bathroom for a really long time because he didn't want to go to mass, end quote. On August 2021 post on the Facebook page for the Church of the Annunciation celebrated the retirement of Mary Grace Westman after 5 years working there. Kletter remembers Robin's mom, Mary Grace, even more. She worked in the front office at school and in the parish. Kletter said the school curriculum included confirmation, one of Catholicism's 7 sacraments, often seen as the sacrament of maturity where young people declare their faith. Mary Grace Westman led some of the classes on how faith could be weaved into their lives, Kletter also said. Robin Westman was in that class but did not participate and was not confirmed, Kletter noted. He sat back quietly, she said. A phone call and text message to a cell phone number listed as belonging to Mary Grace Westman was not answered Wednesday afternoon. Officials also have not yet successfully reached the shooter's mother, O'Hara said on Thursday. Associated Press reporters unsuccessfully attempted to reach the shooter's father at an address listed as his residence. Phone calls and text messages to numbers associated with Robin Westman's siblings were also not answered. Police have not yet identified any particular grievance or triggering event with the church, O'Hara said. So what else is known about the shooter? Well, federal officials referred to Westman as a transgender. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey condemned anyone who would use the shooting to villainize the transgender community. Westman's gender identity was not very clear. In 2020, a judge approved a petition signed by Westman's mother asking for a name change from Robert to Robin, saying the petitioner identifies as a female and wants her name to reflect that identification. And of course, the her there is insane. The fact that a judge actually used that language is insane. And the fact that Robin Westman's apparently devout Catholic mother decided that it was okay to let his son transition is also insane. But I digress on that. Westman's uncle, former Kentucky state lawmaker Bob Helleringer, told the Associated Press he barely knew Robin Westman, the youngest child of one of his sisters, but was watching coverage of Wednesday's tragedy. So related to a politician in Kentucky. Fairly interesting, but also not terribly uncommon. Helleringer did say he wished he had shot me instead of the innocent school children, which, obviously a very cool sentiment. Spokesperson for Rise, a medical marijuana dispensary company, confirmed that Westman worked at one of the Minnesota dispensaries for several months this year, but said Westman was not employed with Rise at the time of the shooting. Police said they were aware of videos and writings that may have come from the shooter. On a YouTube channel titled Robin W., there was at least 2 videos posted before the channel was taken down by site administrators. The video never shows the face of the person speaking. On display throughout the videos are specific references to more than 15 different perpetrators and episodes of mass violence in the U.S. and abroad, both recent and from before the shooter was born, which, by the by, do expect a uptick in censorship on this platform, precisely because Robin Westman posted these videos on YouTube. YouTube is going to get flack from this. Advertisers are going to pull because of this. Politicians are going to rabble because of this. And YouTube, because it's run by cowards, is going to cave. Okay, so do expect to see stricter censorship as a result of this terrorist attack, particularly stricter censorship on YouTube. The video shows a letter written to the person's family apologizing for what the shooting will mean for them, expressing love for them, and saying to change their name and move on. The letter noted that they long felt depression and had suicidal thoughts, and have thought about doing this for a long time, but only recently decided to carry out the shooting. I skipped ahead of something, sorry. In one video, the video pans across a cache of weapons and ammunition, and the person filming picks each up and shows it off to the camera. The weapons and magazines were tagged with graffiti, showing a fascination with people who committed acts of public violence, and included things like "Where is your God?" and "Kill Donald Trump." During the video, the person filming sings the word "tomorrow" and says, "I'm sorry to my family. That's the only people I'm sorry to." A second, almost 20-minute long video shows nearly 200 pages of 2 different journals, mostly written in what appears to be Cyrillic alphabet. The second journal had a last dated entry of August 21st and had a sticker on the inside cover depicting a semi-automatic AK-style rifle on top of a trans equality pride flag. During the video, the person flips to what appears to be a drawing of the layout of a church and points to 2 outside windows and then stabbing the illustration with a knife. Later reported Laura reported from Philadelphia, Schreiner from Shelbyville in Kentucky, and Fingerhut from Des Moines in Iowa. So that is who this person is, right? This is an example of left-wing domestic terrorism. And part of the thing we do want to note here is, guard yourselves for this kind of thing, because the left is getting crazier and crazier as time is going on. And the thing that you guys need to realize is this is actually the logical conclusion of leftism. There's a Bible verse that talks about them, those who hate me love death, right? Those who hate me, the me speaking there is God. Those who hate me love death. Actually, technically it's wisdom. But wisdom, it's a personification of God's wisdom, right? And it's Proverbs 8:36, if you're not familiar with it. And it's exactly correct. Those who hate the Creator and his wisdom love death. That's why they love homosexuality, because it can't produce any viable offspring. That's why they love transgenderism, because it sterilizes viable reproducers. That's why they love abortion, because it's child sacrifice, right? That's why they love violent music and so on and so forth. And I'm not talking here about things like Screamo, although that's part of it. But, you look at the kind of stuff that people actually sing about on the radio. That's the kind of stuff I'm talking about. That's why they like torture porn, as they call it, which is movies like Saw, right? Where the whole point is to sit there and watch somebody in excruciating pain for a long period of time, which is demented, I might add. Okay. They love death. And in this particular instance, in America, is what I mean, we actually have a culture of death, a culture that loves the idea of death. Don't reproduce. Don't get married. If you are going to have kids, do it late, right? And only have a few, if not one, right? Certainly don't get married. Why? Because we want to reduce the population. Overpopulation is a real problem, they say, right? And we're destroying this planet, and the cows are destroying this planet, so let's get rid of them too, and so on and so forth. We have a culture of death, right? We have a culture that loves death. Why? Because it hates God, and it hates God's wisdom, Proverbs 8:36. And what are we to do about that? Well, the only thing we can do about that, first off, we need to pray for revival in this country. We need to pray for a complete and total revival in this country and a reformation in this country, such that people don't actually have this wickedness in their hearts anymore. Why? Because they've been regenerated by the Holy Spirit. I'll get off my soapbox for a minute, because that's the first thing. Second thing, to the little diatribe I went on to start this video, I think we need to treat transgenderism the same way we treat incelism, right? The same way we treat Nazism, the same way we should treat communism, which is, as a society, we need to treat it as an active threat. And unlike things like Nazism and Stalinism, which are political ideologies, right? And therefore you have a right to them, is my point, right? Right to free speech. You don't have any such right to transition. You don't have any such right to transgenderism, right? So I think we should actively try to suppress, at a government level, transgenderism. It should be illegal to transition. It should be illegal to have drag queen story hours. It should be illegal to have drag queen burlesque stripping, or burlesque and stripping. Those are technically two different things, I think. I'm not 100% sure, to be honest, if burlesque strips all the way down. But my understanding is that those are two different things. These things should be suppressed at the state level. And this is one of those areas where I actually strongly agree with the so-called Christian nationalists, right? They are right that states are moral agents. And if states are moral agents, then they behave either wrongly or rightly. One of the ways you behave wrongly is by allowing things you should not allow. And one of the things that the current United States government, or more specifically the 50 state governments, because the federal government should not get involved in this, one of the things that the 50 state governments are wickedly allowing is transgenderism. It needs to be legally suppressed. Doctors who transition anybody, minors or otherwise, need to be put in prison, and they need to lose their medical license permanently with no possibility of getting it back. Okay? And we need to identify these people as transgender terrorists. That's the ideology, is transgenderism. So that should be the ideological adjective that we apply to the word terrorist when we record these things for posterity and even for our own present times in things like the news. And what we certainly should not do is what leftist lawmakers in Minnesota are currently trying to do, what leftists seemingly every time there's some kind of a tragedy like this try to do, and that is try to come for people's genuine rights, such as what we read here from NPR. After Minneapolis mass shooting, 2 Minnesota leaders push for gun reform. Yes, gun reform. That's the problem. The problem is not allowing a culture of death. The problem is not turning away from God. The problem is not endorsing people and their choices to rebel against reality itself. Hey, you're born either a male or a female. That's just a scientific fact. There's nothing anybody can do about it. But we're going to go along with your delusions anyhow. That's not the problem. You know, the problem is access to AK-47s. Even though the Second Amendment, of course, enshrines the right to self-defense and firearm ownership. Digression aside, this article starts, 2 children ages 8 and 10 were killed in a mass shooting on Wednesday while gathered for a mass at Minneapolis Catholic School at a Minneapolis Catholic school to mark the first week of classes. 17 others were wounded, including 14 children between the ages of 6 and 15. And these numbers are a little bit out of date. It's actually 15 children and 18 others wounded. Digression aside. Minneapolis Police Chief Brian O'Hara identified 23-year-old Robin Westman as the shooter. Westman was later found dead in the back of the church from a self-inflicted gunshot wound. Authorities are still investigating his motive. And again, we have to change the language because NPR is going along with the shtick and saying her motive, even though this was a grown man who committed this mass shooting. Let's be perfectly clear about this. It wasn't a her, it wasn't a they, it wasn't a them. It was a him. He did it. And he was a man, regardless of what the woke skulls try to tell you. The shooting is renewing debates over America's gun laws. The two of Minnesota's prominent leaders, both Democrats, are seizing the moment to push for a change. What is it? The former Obama chief of staff and mayor of Chicago, Rahm Emanuel, who might be running for president in 2028, by the way. Not predicting it, but it's something to look out for. What is it that he used to say? Never let a good crisis go to waste, right? That is certainly what they are doing here now. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey and Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison are proposing different approaches. In a conversation with NPR's Michael Martin, Frey advocated for mayors to take on the responsibility of reducing gun violence within their own cities, saying, quote, "Look, if the federal government or the state government is not going to take the necessary steps to protect my constituents, let me do it. Give cities around the country the ability to take action to keep their constituents safe," end quote. Ellison, speaking in a separate interview with NPR's Lila Fidel, said officials and lawmakers on every level should be held accountable for reducing gun violence. But he specifically honed in on federal gun reform, recalling the decade-long federal assault weapons ban passed in 1994. In other words, he wants to see that return. He wants a federal weapons ban again, right? An assault weapon ban may well have stopped him from using that weapon, Ellison said. There are a number of things we could have done, end quote. Hey, stop it. So we don't have to get too deep into the rest of this particular article. It's really not necessary. The point is, once again, even though, it's funny when a right-winger and it has happened. I'm not going to pretend like people on the right have never committed acts of violence. When a right-winger commits some heinous act of violence, the ideology and all even remotely associated ideologies is what comes into question. But when an Islamist or a left-winger does it, it's just the guns. That's the only problem, right? Which is something to note. The other thing here, though, I want to bring to everybody's attention is you have to understand that the left, essentially what we're seeing here is the leftist playbook is, number one, gaslight you into being mad at reality, into allowing people's delusions to be accepted. Number two, kill your kids when those delusional people act as delusional people act. Number three, gaslight you into thinking those delusional people, in fact, were not delusional. And number four, gaslight you into thinking the real problem is that you have a right to own a firearm. So they're going to kill you, and then they're going to turn around and use the death of you or your children as a means to take away other people's rights to defend their children. You see what I'm saying? Imagine if I came in, I smacked your wife around real quick, and then I said, you know what? The fact that this was allowed is ridiculous. We should ban marriage. There should be no wives. That's roughly analogous to what we have going on here. I'm going to kill your kids, I being the leftist, right? And then I'm going to say, oh, the killing of your kids was so tragic, we should ban firearms so that you don't have the right to defend your kids afterwards. Now, of course, criminals are still going to find a way to get the guns. That's not really the point. It's not actually going to reduce anything. It's certainly not going to change the human heart. The human heart is deceitful above all things and desperately wicked. See Jeremiah 17:9. But it's a disgusting and despicable playbook that comes from evil people who run this country, by and large, who seek to murder individuals. They seek to murder them in the womb. They seek to murder them in their churches. They seek to murder them in their schools. They seek to murder them in foreign countries. And then after they've committed these acts of heinous murder, use the very fact that heinous murders occurred as a means to strip liberty from the victims of the murder. That's the leftist playbook here, friends. And a lot of y'all are still deceived into thinking that we live in a time where we can treat these people as if they are our what's the word I'm looking for here? Compatriots. They're not. They're not. They hate you. They hate you. Now, of course, as people who defend liberty, and as Christians, and as people who wish to see the nation of America standing, we cannot stoop to their level. That doesn't mean we can't defend ourselves or anything of that nature. And I frankly think that you should. You should be trained just in case, right? But it does mean you need to quit pretending like we're on equal playing fields here. We're not, right? A lot of people ask me sometimes, and I promise this thought is related. A lot of people ask me sometimes why I'm so against Donald Trump when the alternative is Kamala Harris or Joe Biden or Hillary Clinton or whatever. And ignoring the fact that that's just blatantly wrong. Obviously, primaries exist and third-party candidates exist and things of that nature. One of the biggest reasons to criticize people like Donald Trump is because he's the viable option, right? Kamala Harris is not even a viable option. Of course, I'm going to critique her, and I'm going to critique the side of the country that voted for her, right? But she's not even really an American in the sense that she wishes to lead the United States of America we once knew. She wants to lead this new age America. In fact, she wants to bring us into this new age of America like the rest of the leftists do, where there's no guns and where everybody's allowed to screw each other. So part of the reason that I'm so critical of right-wing politicians or right-wing so-called politicians, it's not just because they represent my movement, but it's because of the fact that they're the only viable options. Really, it's a conversation about Ted Cruz versus Donald Trump. It's not a conversation about Donald Trump versus Kamala Harris because Kamala Harris is not a viable option. See what I'm saying? And I use Ted Cruz just because he came the closest to defeating Trump back in 2016. But of course, Kamala Harris is 2024, so we're kind of mixing election cycles there. Anyways. You have to understand, friends, that leftists are your enemies. They're not your countrymen. They're not your compatriots. They're not your brothers and sisters. They are your enemies. Now, you are to love your enemies, but you need to understand who they are. You need to understand the nature of this conflict. The nature of this conflict is that the side you're fighting will kill your 8-year-old and then take your gun using the death of your 8-year-old as the excuse to do it. That's the reality we live in. That's the reality of what leftism is. If you don't understand that, you don't understand the fight we're in, friends. And that is just the way the cookie crumbles. I'm sorry. There is no other way I could put that. With that being said, there is a couple other things I wanted to get to here real quick. And we're going to divert a little bit. We're still going to be talking about an LGBT issue. However, a lot of people know that I have been skeptical of Pope Leo XIV and whether or not he is going to truly bring the church back to some level of conservatism and traditionalism. I've said before that I think the Franciscan Revolution, or Bergoglian Revolution rather, to distinguish it from the Franciscan friars, is in full swing, and that Leo is bought and paid for and fighting for the cause. And it seems like we got a confirmation of that the Vatican is actually continuing down this path with this joyous article. Vatican includes LGBTQ pilgrimage and rainbow crucifix in their 2025 Jubilee celebrations. One more time. Vatican includes LGBTQ pilgrimage and rainbow crucifix in 2025 Jubilee celebrations. So yeah, it seems like it's a little bit of business as usual in the Catholic Church, and of course, usual as in the last 12 years. 12 years ago being when Pope Francis was elected. The Jubilee, by the way, is going to be taking place between December 24th of this year and January 6th of next year, in case you're curious. Let's read a little bit about this article. We're not going to have a speed round in this particular video. But anyway. The Vatican is preparing to host a series of events for the LGBTQ community in Rome next week, including a mass, prayer vigils, and a procession to St. Peter's Basilica. Notice, the Vatican itself is actually hosting these events. Yes, the Vatican itself, not somebody who is Catholic, not even a high-ranking official within the Catholic Church, but the Vatican itself is actually hosting this event. The nature of these events raises a troubling question. Is Pope Leo allowing apostasy to enter the Vatican for the whole world to see? And of course, why not? He's walking in the footsteps of Jorge Mario Bergoglio, better known as Pope Francis, before him, right? Remember, Francis went down to the Amazon during the Amazonian Synod in 2019 and participated in a pagan ritual and took a statue of a pagan fertility goddess called Pachamama and brought it back with him to St. Peter's Basilica and declared it Our Lady of the Amazon. Oh, and by the way, his writer, who was responsible for writing all official documents that came out of that synod, said all rites, R-E-T-E-S, are actually a way to worship the self-same God. Remember that same Jorge Mario Bergoglio, better known as Pope Francis, once decided to get a collection of quote-unquote Abrahamic faith leaders together, people like not just Orthodox and Protestant and stuff like that, but Mormons and Orthodox Jew and Muslim and Rastafari and Druze and stuff like that, right? To get them all together at a pagan temple in Iraq so that they could all pray under the banner of their common father Abraham. Same Pope Francis, right? Leo's just walking in his footsteps. He's just doing the same thing Francis was already doing. He's just continuing it, and he's being a little bit more sneaky with it so that he can, again, try to massage this into the very fabric of Catholicism. Francis is the revolutionary. Leo is the reformer. In other words, Francis is the one who lights the fire, and Leo is the one who maintains it and makes sure it continues. Right? Continuing on September 5th, the international meeting, quote, listening to the experiences of LGBTQ Catholics, end quote, will take place inside the Vatican, organized by Outreach, a U.S. organization founded by Jesuit Father James Martin. Note that Francis himself was a Jesuit. According to the announcement, quote, LGBTQ Christians or Catholics rather, from various countries will share their experiences, end quote. And by the by, that was not me changing the wording there. Actually, they do use the word Catholic. Note that James Martin, by the way, is an American priest, on top of the fact that he is a Jesuit. He's editor-at-large of America Magazine, right, which is probably the largest monthly Catholic magazine in America, or at least the largest Jesuit magazine in America, right? But it's just interesting that Martin, and by the way, Martin was also appointed as a consultant to the Secretariat for Communications in 2017 by Pope Francis. He was part of the Synod on Synodality in 2023, specifically being invited by Pope Francis, right? So this is, again, the Bergoglian Revolution is in full effect, friends. But the reason I point out that he's an American is because, well, who else is an American? Pope Leo XIV, right? And in fact, they actually lived very near each other. Martin graduating from University of Chicago and Leo being born in Chicago, and of course, raised in Chicago. Now, the other thing, like I said, James Martin is the founder of Outreach. Outreach is a Catholic news site that is dedicated specifically to homosexual and transgender Catholics, right? So the fact that Martin had such a strong relationship with Francis, and this is one of the things he's known for, is founding Outreach, should kind of keep people into something. But nevertheless, Martin is certainly a bridge, you could say, between the Leo wing, if you want to call it that, or the Leo era, and the Francis era. Rainbow crucifix in the church. Later that evening, a prayer vigil will be held in Rome's Church of the Gesù with LGBTQ Christians, their parents, and other participants. The Vatican noted that during the vigil, quote, a rainbow cross will be presented, which was brought to Rome by a group of LGBTQ pilgrims and their parents, end quote. And I would just like to note right off the bat that is blasphemous. That is absolutely, positively, beyond any shadow of a doubt, demonic, satanic, disgusting blasphemy. It is blasphemy. Now, the rainbow itself is, of course, God's creation, and it's, in fact, even God's creation to note that he will not ever again destroy the world with a flood, and, in fact, will never again destroy the world at all until the time when he's going to destroy it entirely. See Genesis chapter 9. But that's not what they mean, is it? See, there's nothing wrong with having a cross painted red, but if you're having a cross painted red at a meeting of communists, well, then there's a context there, right? Same thing here. The mere fact that it's a rainbow is not the problem. The rainbow belongs to God. The thing is, this is a group of LGBTQ Christians, or quote-unquote Christians, Catholics, and people who affirm homosexuality and transgenderism in the Catholic Church. And they're the ones painting the cross, the symbol of this religion, the thing on which Christ died for remission of sins. They are the ones painting this rainbow colors. Why? Because rainbow colors, specifically the 6 colors of the rainbow, rather than the 7 colors of the rainbow that exist in reality, there they are distorting reality again, is the symbol they have decided to use for their movement. So they are painting the symbol of Christ's crucifixion, the symbol of atonement at Calvary. They are painting with the colors of their debauched sexual movement. And Leo's just allowing it. Because of course he is. On September 6th, Bishop Francesco Savino, vice president of the Italian Episcopal Conference, will preside over a mass at that same church, followed by a Jubilee pilgrimage to the Holy Door at St. Peter's Basilica with more than 1,000 participants. So I guess this isn't straight up at the Jubilee, because my understanding is the Jubilee is not till December. But at any rate. Finally, pilgrims will join the Pope for the Angelus prayer in St. Peter's Square. The previous Pope, Francis, made several statements indicating openness for the LGBTQ community. Asked whether there was room in the church for transgender, non-binary, or LGBT people, he responded, quote, "Every person is a child of God, everyone. God rejects no one, and clergy in the Catholic Church should not do so either," end quote. He added, "I have no right to expel anyone from the church. The church must not close its doors to anyone." Now, of course, historically, that's just hilarious. The Pope would expel people from the church all the time. But notice, every person is a child of God. God rejects no one, and clergy in the Catholic Church should not do so either. Now, in a certain context, that could be true. That's part of the thing that made Francis so brilliant, is he would say things that's like, okay, well, yeah, God, obviously, we don't want to turn homosexuals away. We want them to hear the gospel. And it's like, yes, that's exactly right. And hopefully, just like the woman caught in adultery, they will go and sin no more, having been converted and regenerated by the Holy Spirit. That's the idea, right? But Francis would say these things in a context where that was clearly not what he was trying to suggest. And in this instance, he's asking, is there a place for LGBT, that is not to say repentant gays, but is to say people who identify as homosexual? Is there a place for them in the Catholic Church? And he says, well, who am I to judge, basically, right? Now, I want to be clear. I know not my entire audience watching this is Christian. If you are a Christian, there should be a place for gays in your church. But it's so you can call them to repentance and to turn away from their wicked ways. It's not so that you can affirm them in their wicked ways. That's not what it's about, friends. It's never been what it's about. Jesus didn't hang out with publicans and sinners so that he could affirm them in their sin. Jesus didn't hang out with wine bibbers and prostitutes so that he could help them get drunk and sell their bodies. Jesus hung out with these people so that he could turn them away from their wicked lifestyles in love. That was the point. Is that the point of what the Catholic Church is currently doing? No, I don't think it is. In fact, I happen to know it's not, because that's what they're telling us. Loving those who are trapped, and by the way, this article says the same thing. Loving those who are trapped in sin is one thing. Jesus himself shows compassion to sinners, but he always calls them to go and sin no more. See John 8 and 11. What we are witnessing in Rome looks less like an invitation to repentance and more like an affirmation of lifestyles that God has declared abominable. And again, I say amen. What is taking place in the Vatican is not happening in isolation. Many mainline Protestant denominations, such as the United Methodist Church, embraced the same road years ago, affirming rather than lovingly correcting sin. But you could say affirming rather than loving, because love does not affirm when you are in sin. Love corrects when you are in sin. But that being said, this is completely right. Many mainline Protestant denominations have fallen into abject apostasy. There's no doubt about that. No doubt about that. Today, those denominations have largely abandoned biblical authority, replacing the gospel with cultural accommodation. This is the fruit of apostasy, the great falling away Scripture foretells in 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 3. Now, I would like to point out that technically in that element, the Protestant denominations were actually just keeping up with the Pope, because the Catholic Church has actually already replaced the gospel and replaced the Bible as a biblical authority with the church, right? Now, the church used to have its sacred tradition. Now it has its cultural accommodations. So there is a change there. But they're not actually replacing the gospel or biblical authority with a accommodation to the modern culture. They're replacing their traditions with accommodations for the modern culture. And the article continues to talk about the end times falling away. This article comes from Charisma Magazine, which does believe we are living in the end times. I'm not necessarily endorsing or condemning that view. I'm just saying that it is more of a theological view and therefore not in our purview for today's episode. The point is this, friends. This is yet another example of what I have been trying to tell you. The Bergoglian Revolution is in full swing. It's been in full swing. Pope Francis passing away was not the end of the descent into progressivism. It is simply the beginning of massaging it into the very fabric of what it means to be Catholic. I remember once on my theology channel in an open room, I asked a friend who is Catholic, right? I asked him, I says, what are you going to do? Because you guys have a theological commitment to the idea that the Holy Spirit will ultimately not allow the church to fall into apostasy. I obviously don't share any such conviction. This friend's name was Fro. So, Fro, what are you going to say? Will you admit that this is nonsense? Will you admit that this is a false church? Will you admit that the idea that the Spirit is guiding this church in particular from ever falling into sin is wrong? What are you going to do if it turns out that because Francis appointed 75% of all the electing bishops, guaranteeing that somebody who was in line with what he believed was elected next, what are you going to do if the next pope and the pope after that and the pope after that and the church after that as a whole go down the road that I'm telling you they're going to go down, where they are progressive, and that is what ultimately becomes of the Catholic Church? What are you going to do? And of course, there was no answer for that, because there can't be. He simply noted, I'm not, and to his credit, he was fairly honest. He said, I don't know what I would do, and I'm paraphrasing here. I don't know what I would do, but I don't believe that's going to happen. And he did note that schism might be on the board if something like that did take place. Ladies and gentlemen, something like that is taking place right before our very eyes in this Roman Catholic Church. And there's nothing that anybody can do about it, because this is what the church, once a certain ideology has taken control of the church, it's now nested, and you can't question them because the Pope is the one with authority. Who are you to question what is sacred tradition and what isn't? Who are you to question what the Bible says and what it doesn't? Simple plebeian, layman you. Don't you know that the church has ultimate authority over matters of morality and doctrine? We're witnessing the fall of the Catholic Church into debauchery before our very eyes. It had already fallen into heresy, but we are now witnessing them fall into the same debauchery, the same satanicness, the same nonsense, the same disregard for biblical authority that the mainline Protestant churches fell into, that the World Council of Churches fell into, that the Mormon Church fell into, that the Jehovah's Witness Church fell into, and that so far virtually every major, even the Southern Baptist Convention, for crying out loud, has fallen into. It's a sad time, friends, but it is indicative of the times we are living in. That's pretty much all we got for today's video. So if you like this video, please remember to like and share this video. Please consider subscribing to the channel if you have not done so. Hit that bell to get notified every time that we go live. Remember to leave any questions, comments, criticisms, concerns, critiques, or anything of that nature in the comment section down below. Want to, of course, remind you guys to be watchdogs, to be vigilant. We will hope to be with you guys next week. And, of course, we always want to have you guys asking yourselves this question. In the face of Armageddon, will you compromise?